Question: is there a specific distance that one has to travel from home to be considered a traveler authorized to combine prayers? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Nabi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. The scholars of Islam have differed regarding this issue, with many contemporaries holding that the custom, what people in a particular society consider to be a trip or journey, is the determining factor and what ultimately distinguishes a trip that allows a person to take advantage of the religious concessions of traveling and one which does not. So basically, to reiterate, some scholars, many contemporaries, hold that custom or tradition or what is commonly accepted in a particular land or society. What do the people in that land or society typically consider or deem a trip, a journey? Whatever that is, whatever distance that is, will be considered a journey, and therefore it will differ from time to time and from place to place. That's one opinion. The vast majority of scholars, however, including Al-Imam Malik, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd, Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i, and Al-Imam Ahmad, and others, are of the opinion that a person is traveling when two conditions are met. Number one, when he or she has set out with the intention of going to a specific destination, set out with the intention of traveling to a certain place. So it's not traveling Islamically if a person just gets in their car and says, you know what, I just feel like driving today. I just feel like getting away. And they get in their car and they drive with no particular destination in mind. And before they realize it, they've traveled 100 miles. That person can't say, oh, I traveled. Let me shorten and combine my prayers. That's the first condition. You have to travel with a certain place in mind, intending to go to a specific place. The second condition is that the distance between the city limits of a person's residence and the place to which they intend to travel must be no less than 4 barids, arba' burud, which equals approximately 48 miles or 80 kilometers. The view of the majority is supported by the fatwa of two of the Prophet's companions, Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma. Both were adamant that a journey shorter than this distance should not be considered traveling and does not authorize the religious concessions associated with traveling. Allah knows best, brothers and sisters, but this second opinion, that the ruling of traveling and the concessions for traveling are applicable only when one has traveled 48 miles or more while targeting a specific destination, this second opinion is more credible. It's the more credible of the two opinions because, number one, it is the opinion of two of the Prophet's companions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. He says, addressing the Prophet and his companions, if they believe as you believe, then they are rightly guided. The scholars of Islam have said, مفهوم المخالفة, the opposite meaning is also intended. If they don't believe the way you, the Prophet's companions, believe, they don't understand the deen the way you understand it, فَقَدْ ضَلُّوا, then they have what? They've gone astray. Allah also says, as-Saabiqun al-awwalun min al-Muhajirin wal-Ansar wal-ladhina taba'uhum bi-ihsan radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. He says that the first and foremost to accept Islam from the immigrants, those who migrated from Mecca to Al-Madinah, and the Ansar, those who received them in Al-Madinah, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ, and those who follow them in righteousness, those who follow in their footsteps, radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with him. Now, if you notice the way the ayah is constructed, when he mentioned Ashab Rasulullah, the companions, he mentioned them bishakl mutlaq. He mentioned them bidun, he mentioned his rida. He mentioned his pleasure for them bishakl mutlaq, without any qaid, without any restrictions, or without any specific boxes that they had to check. He's pleased with them, absolutely. But when it came to those who came after them, that means you and me. He says, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ, and those who follow them in righteousness, which means Allah is saying that He expects those who come after the companions to follow the deen in the same way that they followed it. So when we get something from the Prophet's companions, we clutch onto it because their understanding, their interpretation, their implementation of the deen is the best. It is the one endorsed by Allah, and is the one that if we follow it, Allah will be pleased with us. But number two, the second reason why we say that this is the more credible of two opinions is that Imam Al-Hafidh ibn Abdul Barr, he mentioned that these two companions would never rule publicly and adamantly instruct people to consider this distance, 48 miles, accompanied by the intention, to be the determiner. They would never do that. Make that the determiner of a journey unless they heard it from the Prophet himself, because this is not something that they can make ijtihad on, that they can do deductive reasoning and try to basically look here and look there and draw a conclusion and they be adamant that this is what it is. They must have heard it. Ibn Abdul Barr, he said, they must have heard it from the Prophet ﷺ, or that must have been his regular practice that they observed, and from that they ruled accordingly. Number three, the third reason why we say that this is the stronger of the two opinions is that al-urf, custom and tradition, is highly subjective. The first group of scholars, many of the contemporaries, they say, hey, it's up to custom. Where do you live? What do the people do where you live? That's what you go with. The problem with that is it's highly subjective and not uniformly defined. And in the Sharia of Allah, acts of worship and what is allowed and disallowed is never left to chance or determined by factors which are subjective. We just don't see that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always gives us something fixed, easily determined, and not subjective, not prone to, different whims and feelings and inclinations. He always gives us something fixed to determine the acts of worship, the beginning, the end, and the how, and the ways, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, the reason why we say that this opinion is the stronger of the two opinions is because it is safer. Because if you go by custom, you may be right, you may be wrong. But if you go by the distance, which is what the early Muslims did and what the companions have ruled and given their verdicts accordingly, if you do that, no one says, the people who say custom, they don't say you're wrong. But if you follow the other opinion, the vast majority of scholars throughout history will say, if you go with the idea that custom is the determiner, those scholars, the vast majority of the scholars, would say that you're wrong. And so you want to follow the opinion where no one says you're wrong, because that opinion is safer. And with that, and Allah knows best, هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.